Hello, and welcome to For Your Innovation, where I sit down with industry experts and leaders to share their business knowledge and insight with startup founders and aspiring entrepreneurs. My name is Ashley Everett, and I am the executive producer and marketing director at RevTech Labs. And joining me today is Juan Garzon, the executive director of Innovate Charlotte, a nonprofit organization with a mission to enhance, elevate, and accelerate entrepreneurial success in the greater Charlotte region. As well as he is the executive director for PitchBreakfast, which is another Charlotte-based organization that provides startups a chance to practice their most crucial pitch in a challenging and supportive environment. Thank you for joining me today, Juan.
Thanks, Ashley.
So let's just dive right in. So I want to kind of start with maybe like a little bit of a hypothetical. If I am a relatively new founder and I'm about to go into my first big meeting with a potential investor, where would I begin to even develop my pitch?
Well, hopefully you've been working on your pitch from far before you actually go in to talk to an investor. I've always see the pitch as far more than just the conversation that you have with a potential investor. Because a pitch is essentially your business in a nutshell. You know, it's describing all of the different aspects of your business model, and you're going to have to do that to potential co-founders. You're going to have to do that to potential employees. If you just started a business and you've got one co-founder, you had to pitch them to get them on board with your idea, and so hopefully you've been working on the different aspects of that pitch, of that conversation, far before then. But if you are about to have a meeting with an investor, I would watch other pitches. Go do, our pitches at Pitch Breakfast, we record all of them, and watch how other companies do that. That's probably the first step that I would take.
Yeah. And so that's a really great, piece of advice to really kind of have it in the pocket and ready to go, regardless of who you're talking to. But do you feel that there are any formalities that an investor would want to hear versus just kind of a more general pitch to a potential employee or just kind of a general community pitch?
So for a pitch to be a pitch, there has to be certain elements. You have to actually be asking for something, right? Otherwise, it's just sort of an update or a story. Let me tell you about my business. But if it's an actual pitch, which was what we try to orient all of our presentations at Pitch Breakfast, and also what you would have to give in a pitch competition or in an angel group event, it's going to have at least 3 elements. There has to be some sort of opportunity, right? You're saying, hey, here's an opportunity that I found or that we're making or that is coming across. There has to be some sort of vehicle, something that you've built or something that you're building. And then there has to be that ask, right? Here's what we can do, but to get there, we're going to need money or your partnership or whatever that is. Opportunity, vehicle, and ask. Without any one of those, it's not a pitch. It's just a presentation.
Right. Yeah. No, those are good differentiators there. Another thing that I feel that we've kind of run into here at RevTech Labs is the timing conversation. Do you feel that there is a right time length for a pitch? And if so, what is that?
Yeah, the length of a pitch is the right timing, and the right length of a pitch is whatever the judges in your pitch event tell you that it is. It totally depends. At Pitch Breakfast, we have a 2-minute no slides pitch, and we recently started a 90-second elevator pitch challenge. And really, that is literally you're stuck in an elevator, or you're at an event and you meet an investor. You don't have time to pull out slides and do a 20-minute pitch. So you have to have this condensed sort of 90-second version that still hits on the highlights. What problem do you solve and who do you solve it for, and all of these elements that investors might be looking for. The whole point of that is just to stoke enough interest to get a meeting. And then in the meeting, you're going to have, maybe 20 minutes to present. Pitch competitions, pitch challenges, angel investor groups that have structured pitch events can be anywhere from that 2-minute to 5-minute to 6-minute, 7-minute, 10-minute, 20-minute. There's so many different kinds. And I think it's more important that, as a founder, you understand the elements of a pitch and are able to sort of adapt it from that 2-minute version to that 10-minute version.
Yeah, no, that's great to kind of have different versions, right, of your pitch, depending on your audience and the setting and the context.
Absolutely.
I find it interesting that PitchBreakfast, goes with the no pitch deck. Can you tell me a little bit about why that's part of PitchBreakfast's model?
Yeah, so our standard pitch at PitchBreakfast does use a pitch deck. It's a 5-minute presentation with a pitch deck. And I'll get to why we were at 5 minutes specifically.
Okay.
But one of our formats, we've got some other formats, includes the Idea Fund Partners 2-minute no slides format, which is now this 90-second elevator pitch challenge. But we do that along with an actual pitch with slides. It's different formats. And the main reason why we have these multiple formats is exactly what I told you. We want to expose founders and give them that opportunity to practice different kinds of pitches. And you're going to need the skills to adapt your 5-minute presentation with slides to be able to tell that story in 90 seconds without slides. In my opinion, every founder needs to be able to do any and all. And if you have 20 minutes and only a whiteboard, you got to be ready to do that.
Yeah.
So we try to give them that variety in PitchBreakfast.
Okay, so it's more about giving founders the adaptability to be on the fly, ready to kind of present regardless.
Absolutely, and the reason why PitchBreakfast has that 5-minute format, which is it's a standard. We've got companies that will go on and do a 6-minute or a 7-minute or an 8-minute in a different event. It's because I actually, after watching so many presentations at PitchBreakfast, put together sort of a pitch outline of the same, every presentation investors are looking for generally the same things. And so I kind of distilled this down to the 10 questions that every investor wants to ask. And if you take about 30 seconds to answer each question, you're at 5 minutes. So I like teaching the 5-minute pitch, but pretty much because it equips you to be able to scale that up or down depending on your needs.
Yeah, that's great. So to talk a little bit about the pitch deck, what makes an effective deck? And on the other side of that, what really weighs that down? I'm assuming you really want to hit on those 10 questions that you just mentioned, but I would love to get your thoughts on that.
There's a lot of frameworks out there, including some where they say you need 1 slide for your market and 1 slide for your competition and things like that. Right. I very much tried to get entrepreneurs to focus on the presentation itself. What are you going to talk about, and organize that in the right way, right? These 10 questions. And then you use the slides that you need to use to convey the point. So you practice, you figure out what you're going to say, and then figure out what slides are going to support what you say. I've seen some amazing pitches that have 3 slides to explain the market. You don't spend a lot of time on each one, and others that can explain the market in 1 slide. So I'm not a fan of a specific recipe for the slides, because sometimes for your business, it takes more slides or less slides to communicate something. But you have to figure out what you're going to say first, and then have the slides that help convey that. So the way I do that is I actually, in my workshop, is you ask each of the 10 questions on a different note card, and then you have to explain it to somebody. And you can use the back to sketch something out, right? So if I want to sketch out how it works on the note card, if you need that to explain it, that's the basis for a slide, that presents the visual that will help explain that. So it's really about figuring out what you want to say, and then deciding what visual do I need to help communicate that, and then limiting your pitch deck to those visuals. I'll also add that the deck is different if you're in a room full of 1,000 people, versus if you are actually just sitting across the table from a couple investors. So you have to adapt it according to the environment.
Yeah. And so I know you mentioned that there's no, cookie cutter recipe, right, for a pitch deck. I think the reoccurring theme here is adaptability. But is there anything that you see that really, regardless of the context, the audience, that can weigh down a pitch deck?
So the pitch deck is usually weighed down by people who write out what they're going to say on the slide. It's always the biggest complaint is, don't read the slide. And honestly, this isn't specific to startup pitch decks. This is presentation 101.
Yeah.
And it happens all the time. And you could see that in Pitch Breakfast, video after video, is people get nervous and they start to put paragraphs of text on a slide. And of course, what happens is the audience or whoever you're presenting to, they're reading the slide and they're not paying attention to you. So the slides are a visual aid and not a teleprompter. Mm-hmm. That's the biggest thing that weighs pitch deck specifically down.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I don't know if this is kind of true across the board, and I'd really love your thoughts on it, but something that I know we've had several conversations with when people really dive deep into some of the technical aspects. And I think a lot of times the really technical details go way above and beyond what the average person listening knows. What are your thoughts about really including the nitty-gritty technical side of a business and a startup?
So, I mentioned that there's sort of 10 questions that an investor has, or somebody who wants to understand the business model, and that I, always encourage founders to try to spend about 30 seconds to answer each question. Well, none of those questions really have you going into the technical details for much longer than that. Right. So, for example, one of the questions is, how do you solve the problem that you're solving differently from the competition? Here's where you kind of get into that demo. If you force yourself to really take 30, maybe 45 seconds to explain your product, you're going to be very limited on how much technical details you get into. So what I find is, a lot of times founders get lost in the weeds with the technology or with the design or with some other aspect of their business, and they're doing that at the expense of the competitive market or really explaining their traction or their team. They run out of time for the other things. And what you'll find is you don't need to, right? You've wasted time on something that you don't need to get into all of that technical detail. You really just need to be able to say a few things. There's an opportunity that I found, and here's what I'm building to take advantage of that opportunity, and here's how you make money and all that. And here's the ask. Here's what I need to be successful. And I think a lot of founders are almost surprised that investors aren't as interested in the technical details about it. They just need to know, does it work? Does it solve the problem? Do people want to buy it? Great. Let's move on.
Yeah.
The pitch is for the business, not for your product. That's what I think a lot of people forget. You're presenting a business model, not a product pitch.
Yeah, that's a great differentiator right there. So one of the things I feel like is, again, kind of woven throughout the conversation, I feel like Pitch Breakfast is kind of culminating all the things into one, but what are some great practice techniques that you can share to help a founder really refine and tighten up their pitch?
So one big practice thing, and one of the things that a lot of early founders struggle with is timing, right? They'll say, 5 minutes, okay, and they'll start talking and they'll get through half of their presentation and 5 minutes is up. And so I mentioned earlier this idea of mapping out sort of all of the questions that you need to answer in your presentation or all the different parts and practicing just that part for 30 seconds, right? Can I explain the problem that I'm solving in 30 seconds? Can I explain the market out there, the competition in 30 seconds? And that helps you hone down on these ideas, right? I need to communicate 10 things across, and I'm going to communicate one, then the other, then the other. And it allows you to have a better sense of time rather than, I've got this 5-minute script and I'm going to try to memorize the 5-minute script. That's a lot harder. And unless you're an experienced public speaker, many people struggle with doing, and you'll run out of time. So that's a big one. That said, you do have to practice it. So you can, give note cards with the questions and have somebody else, a co-team member or somebody else, a mentor, ask you, tell me about your business, right? What problem do you solve? And kind of go through the different questions and answer them. answer them in different ways. And when you're saying it out loud, you're going to realize, well, that doesn't make sense, or they need some context, and you can tweak it that way. So the worst thing you can do is not practice and just wing it. You've got to practice it, especially given the timing of whatever event you're going to participate in.
Yeah, so true. But I will say that I've personally sat in on a few pitches where you could clearly tell the founder did a great job at really practicing and getting their pitch down packed. But it almost felt, and this is, given my context, I'm obviously not an investor, but it felt almost a little too scripted, almost robotic. Is there a way to somehow keep a little bit of authenticity into those pitches and not make it feel too rehearsed?
Yeah, that's interesting. So one of the things that the presentation allows a founder to do is to show their passion for the topic.
Yeah.
One of the most important things that I tell all founders is, if you can fall in love with the problem that you're solving, you're going to be a better founder than if you're falling in love with your solution. And so if you've got that passion for the problem, then usually these, people who find that passion can inject it with a lot of authenticity, right? Because this is real. This is here's a problem that I see and that I experienced, or that I saw someone else experience, and I created the solution to solve it. And the more you focus on that passion and that desire to solve this challenge, the less strict and scripted it will feel, right? Because you're speaking, not to be cliche, but like you're speaking from the heart versus kind of going down that list. You still have to hit on all 10 points, but if you remember, I'm answering these questions rather than I'm going through a script, it's gonna come across a lot better. And again, it's the reason why I prefer the 30-second segments versus the 5-minute script. And now, I'll also say that some people write out their entire pitch, and that works for some people. It doesn't for others. And again, this goes back to basic public speaking. If you have a script for the entire pitch, you might get stuck on a part trying to remember what your script said, versus focusing on just answering the question, answering the topic that's in front of you. If we're talking about traction, tell me about traction, rather than, oh, what was that first sentence? What was that first line? If you feel like you really need a script out just your opening and just your close. That way, as soon as you get started, you're confident because you've memorized your first line and it allows you to get into it. And then when you get close to the end, memorize your last line or two to close it out. And that way you can feel strong and sort of don't meander, don't get lost. But otherwise, just have an outline of what you want to touch on and get your timing.
Yeah, that is such great insight. I guess to kind of round up, so say a pitch is all said and done, what's the next steps? How do founders follow up?
So speaking specifically with an investor, that pitch, depending on the type of presentation, is always just going to be a key to another meeting or another presentation. So if you're at an event and you an angel event, for example, and you give that first 10-minute pitch, depending on the success of that, you're going to have another presentation. You're going to be invited back. So every pitch is always just trying to see if there's enough there to have another meeting, another presentation. There's always sort of that follow-on step. In most conversations that you're having with an investor, you're going to get a sense of whether the investor is interested or not. Something you say in the pitch says, oh, you know what, you're maybe a little bit later than we're looking for, or a little bit earlier than we're looking for, or this, something in there. They're going to let you know where the reaction is. And the best thing to do is always ask for advice. A lot, not every, but a lot of investors, if you sit down, you go through a presentation and you get the sense that it wasn't quite there, say, hey, I noticed that you sort of perked up at this one part. Is there anything that maybe I could be clear when I present this? Or do you know another investor who may be interested in this field if this is not something that you're particularly looking for? So just ask for advice, ask for help. Most investors are nice people and willing to help. Again, not all, but most.
Yeah, no, and I know another thing that you've mentioned is more on the event side, like pitch competitions or something maybe like Venture 135, where it's filled with pitch parties. You're pitching to a live audience of hundreds, right? Have you seen any founders do really good follow-up in that kind of a setting? And if so, what are those kind of techniques to take advantage of a setting like that?
It's difficult because it's certainly not the same. If you're pitching at an event with 500 people in the room or whatever, the pitch is different. There's a certain entertainment showman factor to it, and your slides have to really be simple and distilled because you are pitching to the crowd. And pitching to the crowd is about getting everything down to a level where everybody understands and everybody can get excited about. Whereas if you are in a small room with some investors, hopefully you've done your research, you know what the investors are looking for, and you can sort of speak to that level. So really the good follow-up is to provide an opportunity for investors or anybody who's interested in your company at a large event to be able to follow up with additional details. So, here's my presentation, I'm up on stage. I'm at an event with several hundred people on stage, and then here's a link where you can download a more in-depth presentation, or go by my booth where we can actually get into more details on the technology, the IP, the market, or anything like that. Give them that ability to follow up on additional questions, especially a link to like a more in-depth pitch deck or website or something like that, simply because if you are doing a good presentation for a large audience, it's probably going to be dumbed down a little bit. And an investor who gets interest is going to want to do a little bit more research. So make it easy for them to do that. Yeah,
no, that's great advice. But that kind of covers it all for today. So thank you, Juan, for joining me and sharing your insight and your expertise.
Awesome, Ashley. Well, thanks again for having me.
Of course. And for anyone who'd like to connect with Juan further and learn what those 10 questions are that he specifically covered, I'm going to provide all of his information and ways to connect in the show notes below. So thank you again, Juan.
Awesome. Thanks.